Hey there, AP Lang students. Today we're going to go over annotation. I know that we have varying levels of annotating abilities in our class. Some of you've been annotating and you mark up a text like nobody's business and it's a thing of beauty. Others of you, when you read, you're lucky if you mark one or two things. I would like to get practiced in this class at annotating and marking up our pieces, but there has to be rhyme and reason to how you do it. So I am going to talk through some of the strategies for how to annotate. I know it may seem like, oh, don't you just write things down and just kind of underline things, and if you have a highlighter, highlight it? Yes and no. So bear with me. I'm not going to read this thing in its entirety, but I do want to highlight a few key things. All right, so many of you may not know this, but the best practice for annotating is to read through your selection twice. Always read the selection at least twice, no matter how long it is. The first reading gives you a chance to get acquainted with the essay and to form your first impressions of it. With the first reading, you want to get an overall sense of what the writer is saying, keeping in mind the essay's title and what you know about the writer from the essay's headnote. The essay will offer you information, ideas, and arguments. Some you may have expected, some you may not have expected. As you read, you may find yourself modifying your sense of the writer's message and purpose. If there are any words that you don't recognize, circle them so that you can look them up later in a dictionary. So the key thing to this is, as I mentioned before, you got to read things twice. I know it takes more time, but the thing is if you pause to annotate something, you're interrupting the flow of the reading, and it could interrupt your understanding of it. So first read through, you're just trying to acclimate yourself to what the piece is saying. You do want to, however, go ahead and, if there's a word that you don't know what the meaning is, don't stop to look it up like as you're reading, but definitely mark it so you can find it again really quickly. And we're in the day and age of phones, so just quickly take your phone out, look up the word, and it will likely enhance your understanding of the sentence. So that's the first read through. You just get a sense for what the author is trying to say. And the less you annotate, the less you stop yourself in interrupting the flow, the more likely you are to just understand it in the first place. Okay, the second reading is going to be when you do what you probably know annotating to be. Your second reading should be quite different from the first. You will know what the essay is about already, where it's going, how it gets there. Now you can relate the parts of the essay more accurately to the whole. Use your second reading to test your first impressions against the words on the page, developing and deepening your sense of how the essay is written and how well. Because you now have a general understanding of the essay, you can pay special attention to the author's purpose and means of achieving that purpose. You can look for features of organization and style that you can learn from and adapt to your own work. So this last bit right here, this is the part when you go ahead and you start marking for rhetorical techniques. And then you start looking for what is the theme? What words help to develop the tone? You can look for the features of organization and style. So how is this piece organized? Does that organization and how does that organizational structure enhance the message of the piece? Okay. Now, a couple of things I want to point out to you here is when you annotate a text, you should do more than simply underline or highlight important points to remember. It is easy to underline so much that the notations become almost meaningless because you forget why you underline the passages in the first place. So there's a fine balance between annotating too much and not enough. You don't want to just do copious markings so that everything just seems so marked up you don't even remember what it was, the reason why you even marked it. Every notation has to have a purpose behind it. As you read, write down your thoughts in the margins or on a separate piece of paper. Mark the selection's main point when you find it stated directly. Look for the pattern or patterns of development the author uses to explore and support that point, and jot that information down. Mark especially poetic or noteworthy word choices, as well as sentences or phrases that seem to have a deep connection to the theme or message of the work. Jot down whatever marginal notes come to mind. Most readers combine brief responses written in the margins with underlining, circling, highlighting, stars, or question marks. And here's what I want you to know. The more practiced you become with annotation, you will develop a marking style that is second nature and comfortable to you. I used to have a teacher who said you need to put a square around unfamiliar words, and you need to put a star next to another type of word and underline this. And she had her own way that she wanted us to mark the text, but that kind of went against my grain as a reader. I had to stop and think about what the way she wanted me to mark it, and it interrupted my interaction with the piece. So I am in no way going to dictate your shorthand strategy for how you mark. Maybe you are a post-it person. Maybe you are a highlighter person. Maybe you don't get highlighters out or post-its out. You're just quite simply a pencil paper person, and you mark that way. And you use squiggles. I've seen students use squiggles, differentiating a squiggle line from an underline. I don't care what your annotating style is, just that you do it. Okay, so there are a few things. You're going to have this document available to you in a link in today's lesson. So I definitely want you to go through this. These are just some key things to annotate, questions to ask yourself as you read. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to put this in practice. So you have a piece called Isaac Asimov's Intelligence. So let's read through this here together. So what is intelligence anyway? When I was in the Army, I received the kind of aptitude test that all soldiers took, and against the normal of 100, scored 160. No one at the base had ever seen a figure like that, and for 2 hours they made a big fuss over me. It didn't mean anything. The next day I was still a buck private with KP, kitchen police, as my highest duty. All my life I've been registering scores like that, so that I have the complacent feeling that I'm highly intelligent, and I expect other people to think so too. Actually, though, don't such scores simply mean that I'm very good at answering the type of academic questions that are considered worthy of answers by people who make up intelligence tests? People with intellectual bents similar to mine? For instance, I had an auto repairman once who, on these intelligence tests, could not have possibly scored more than 80, by my estimate. I always took it for granted that I was far more intelligent than he was. Yet when anything went wrong with my car, I hastened to him with it, watched him anxiously as he explored its vitals, and listened to his pronouncements as though they were divine oracles, and he always fixed my car. Well then, suppose my auto repairman devised questions for an intelligence test. Or suppose a carpenter did, or a farmer, or indeed almost anyone but an academician. By every one of those tests, I'd prove myself a moron, and I'd be a moron too. In a world where I could not use my academic training and my verbal talents, but had to do something intricate or hard, working with my hands, I would do poorly. My intelligence, then, is not absolute, but is a function of the society I live in and the fact that a small subsection of that society has managed to foist itself on the rest as an arbiter of such matters. Consider my auto repairman again. He had a habit of telling me jokes whenever he saw me. One time he raised his head from under the automobile hood to say, "Doc, a deaf and mute guy went into a hardware store to ask for some nails." He put 2 fingers together on the counter and made a hammering motions with the other hand. The clerk brought him a hammer. He shook his head and pointed to the 2 fingers he was hammering. The clerk brought him nails. He picked out the sizes he wanted and left. Well, Doc, the next guy who came in was a blind man. He wanted scissors. How do you suppose he asked for them? Indulgently, I lifted my right hand and made scissoring motions with my first 2 fingers, whereupon my auto repairman laughed raucously and said, "Why, you dumb jerk, he used his voice and asked for them." Then he said smugly, "I've been trying that on all my customers today." "Did you catch many?" I asked. "Quite a few," he said, "but I knew for sure I'd catch you." Why is that? I asked. Because you're so goddamn educated, Doc. I knew you couldn't be very smart. And I have an uneasy feeling he had something there. So if we take a look at this same document, in Google Docs, you will be able to make highlights and annotations. And so I wanted to show you mine. I took the portion of the text, I put, what is intelligence anyway? And then over on the top right hand, I said, poses the rhetorical question that reveals the complexities of intelligence, a concept not easily defined. I marked scored 160. And over on the right, I put, Asimov establishes ethos regarding his IQ. I mean, he's a smart guy. Then inside of the parentheses, over the note on the side, I said, inside these parentheses, Asimov injects humor by acknowledging that his smarts haven't mattered in some instances in his life. And then I highlighted, actually though, don't such scores simply mean that I'm very good at answering the type of academic questions, blah, blah, blah. And over on the right-hand side, perhaps this is his thesis. It seems like he's going to explore the concept of intelligence. It also connects to the title. I liked very much the very bottom where it says that when he described how the auto repairman explored the car's vitals, listened to his pronouncements as though they were divine oracles, and he always fixed my car. The way Asimov describes the actions of the auto repairman almost seems like he is in some position of leadership, almost like he's some kind of doctor who would be highly intelligent and very educated. Then I put, well, then suppose my auto repairman devised questions for an intelligence test. I liked that because it gets to his purpose as he tries to define what exactly is intelligence. And aren't there multiple ways to perhaps define it? I highlighted moron because I thought he's not only does he say it once, he says it twice. It is self-deprecating humor on Asimov's part, where he's, even though he establishes he's pretty much a genius, he also acknowledges that in a lot of cases he's a moron too, which that self-deprecating method really helps to prepare the reader to receive the message. I put down on the right-hand side, this illustration proves his point. Intelligence is subjective and relative. It kind of just depends on the circumstance. And then that illustration he uses when the joke, the telling of the joke. Asimov uses this anecdote to prove his point. Intelligence is multifaceted and cannot be singularly defined. So down below, I also put, because you're so goddamn educated, Doc, I knew you wouldn't be very smart. That injects irony and humor to the piece by including that part of the dialogue from the joke scenario. And then that last line there, and I have an uneasy feeling he had something there. That's called a telegraphic sentence. It's interesting because visually it's set apart. It's a paragraph on its own, and it is a place of prominence in the essay because it is the very last thing that we read. And so over on the right, I said, this last line, a telegraphic sentence with thoughtful use of the word pairing uneasy feeling, shows Asimov's humility and an epiphany. An epiphany is like an aha or a realization that even though he's a proven genius, he's not smart in many ways that also matter. So in a way, this is trying to get his readers to acknowledge that there are more ways than one to define intelligence, and perhaps not to judge people when looking at others when it comes to intelligence. Human tendency is we also tend to value book smarts over street smarts. So if we take a look at the blank TTP chart, for intelligence, this would be, you'd have to look at your tone words list and you'd have to think of what are some tone words that help to convey the tone of this piece. What is the message of the text about human nature? And as I just said, I feel like the reason why Asimov has to write this piece is because the natural inclination of human beings is to value book smarts over any other type of smarts. And through his message here, and himself being an academician himself, it actually gives him ethos for having an opinion about this. And it's almost like his purpose is persuading readers to perhaps broaden their definition of what intelligence is, and to also perhaps not judge people just on the surface and to value other types of intelligences. Okay, come back to the Google Meet. I want to talk about some more things and tell you what to do next.